the project that you and your husband Malcolm are embarked on, and in your most recent book, is how do you create a culture which is pronatal while also being progressive on issues like this, on, for instance, gay rights, on women's equality, all of this? How do you manage to meld together what has, I think, historically never been melded together? Is that fair to say, that we've never really seen a highly fertile culture that is pro all of these modern things?
Yeah, I guess you could say, I mean, it's hard to say. Like, I would say I often associate modernity and culture with things like gender equality, or feminism, however you want to call it. Though I would say that many traditional cultures are more gender egalitarian than even super progressive culture now, just in really different ways, where like it's not a big deal for people and people just do what they're good at, and it doesn't matter what you're born as, it doesn't matter, like, whatever, you're good at this, you do this. But it's also like, on average, you're probably going to do all the female things and I'm going to do all the male things, and that's okay, you know. So I feel like now in many ways we have more misinterest and misogynist culture even in progressive spheres than we used to. But yes, generally speaking, we haven't seen a post-prosperity, post-industrial revolution, technophilic and progressive culture maintain a high birth rate. And there are so many reasons behind that, but absolutely, that's what our book is about, is how can you create a culture that is that? Or even if you have, let's say, a super conservative culture, I think a lot of families out there are really concerned about their kids going to public school, going to college, and then losing their culture, having it stripped out of them by mainstream culture. I think to a great extent, to opt into modern society, you have to opt into mainstream culture. And we call it in the book a sterilizing meme. I mean, like, sort of the rate at which you have kids plummets after you opt into it. And that is sterilizing, you know. No one's stealing you away or, you know, engaging in surgical procedures, but the result is the same.
Yes, things like going to university, things like just having access to these political ideas seems to dissuade people from having children.
Yes.
Which, I mean, along with all the other material stuff, but I think there tends to be maybe a bit of an overemphasis, certainly in the UK, on the effect of things like house prices, for instance, on lowering fertility. And clearly, yes, there is an economic component to people's decision making in this regard. And maybe some people would have a third child if they could afford a larger house and so on. But it seems to me that people understate the cultural stuff, including religious in particular, because we know that religious people tend to have more children, and just how often you go to church predicts how many children you have and so on. So it seems like there is so much feeding into this, which is quite hard for government to touch in terms of policy.
It's been done.
Yeah.
Wasn't it Hungary that had the patriarch of the church baptize every child like above a certain number that a family had? And that was like actually one of the few pronatalist policies that was really effective.
Interesting.
Like,
I don't think that would work in the UK though, if everyone got baptized by the Archbishop
well,
of
because
Canterbury.
it's not a theocracy, right? Like, people don't, that's not what's valued as much. But when you can use religion like that, oh my gosh, it's so much more. Like, money has not been very effective. Look at the nations that provide free childcare. Look at the nations that provide, I mean, my gosh, in the UK, you can get support for IVF. That's insane, from like government health. I mean, I'm sure it's not like perfect or easy or like the best possible care, but
it is still available though, yes.
Yeah. That's huge. I mean, I slept on a mattress on the floor of a studio apartment for a year just to do IVF. You know, all of our income went to that. Like, the idea that the government support. So, you know, money isn't it. And actually, when we think about like the classic family who has a lot of kids, it's a poor family. You know, we often see them as being poor. I also have never seen families who value having kids culturally saying, oh, well, we just can't have, you know, anymore. We can't afford to have anymore. It's too expensive. There's a couple things going on, obviously. But one, I think, is that modern society and culture has made it very financially unsustainable to have kids, because we treat each child almost like we treat a geriatric adult. Like they need constant care. They have to have, sort of supervised, special, premium everything. I mean, even wealthy families in the past, like they would teach their own kids in their home. Their kids would just kind of hang around their home and like run out in a field if they needed to play. They were not being sent to expensive schools or summer camps. They didn't have all the latest products. They got hand-me-downs or whatever. Maybe they had a tutor who came in, but this was probably someone who was mostly getting room and board at the house, and like getting somewhere nice to stay for a while. This was, even for wealthy families, having kids was very financially sustainable. They were not spending anywhere close to the percentage of disposable income that families are spending on children now. I mean, it's insane to me how much of a cost burden kids are when you raise them the way that people sort of expect to raise kids now. So I think that's one really big factor. It's not, again, so it's not that having kids is expensive or having houses is expensive. Our entire idea of how to raise kids and what kids need or deserve is warped.
Do you think it's partly, so the big factor in most of those historical families is the reason it's possible to homeschool them and to allow them to hang out around the house and stuff is because you normally have the mother at home. I guess that's the really big expensive thing now, is to not have two incomes. That's the big hit that couples face.
I would say yes and no. And this is actually where I get even more excited, is we feel like the nuclear family, which is how we sort of see traditional families as being, where one partner is the breadwinner and goes out and earns all the money. The other partner stays at home, educates the kids, takes care of the household. Both are obviously very demanding careers. We think that that's honestly an aberration that kind of saw its height at the 1950s. And we all kind of anchored to it as the natural way, because that was also this golden age of television media where we sort of like, for the first time, culturally imprinted on what a family looks like collectively, which is also super interesting as like a dynamic. But what we think really a family has been throughout most of human history is what's more commonly described as the corporate family, which is, yes, a mother and a father and kids, but often like an extended family as well. Sometimes a few employees like working on the farm who also participate in family activities. They're at all the meals, they help out with things, or, maybe an aunt or a niece or nephew, so there's this large sort of cluster of people and they're all working together on something. Maybe it's a brewery or a bakery or a farm or a tannery, and the husband and the wife, they both work. And they both raise the kids. And sometimes the kids are apprenticing in the shop, and sometimes the kids are helping around the house, or sometimes, the father's taking care of a kid or the mother's taking care of the kid. Everyone is involved in breadwinning, including the children. Everyone is involved in caring for each other, including the children. And that's a much more sustainable system. And actually what makes me excited is with the death of the lifelong corporate job, I think we're seeing how unsustainable it is now for someone to be a sole breadwinner. One, because jobs just don't last that long. Like a family is putting itself at huge risk if only one person is making all the money, because, who knows how that's going to work out. I think more people are going back to these cottage industries that families used to have, where they're piecing a lot of little things together. They're being very collaborative and ingenious in the way that they do things. We're even seeing this with the business that we run as our day job, where families are sort of working together. We've actually had like people hire relatives to work in their department. And I think that is a much more sustainable model, because then you start bringing in your kids are with you at home as you're working, you have flexibility. And that is more tenable, it is more feasible. A problem that we see that we would love to counteract is that there is no evoked set for that. We don't know what that looks like. We don't know to aspire to it. We don't know that it's an option.
You don't see it on TV.
Yeah. And so we would never think to do it. It's kind of the same issue of like, a lot of girls don't go into STEM because, who do you aspire to, who looks like that in media? You want to be a princess because there's princesses in media, whatever. I know that's kind of changing now, but like, you get the gist. So I think more examples need to be shown for that. And more examples of families who have a lot of kids and are happy with them instead of beleaguered parents. I mean, the best example we can think of a loving family that has 2 to 3 kids, depending on what part of the universe you're looking at, is the Addams family. But like,
Yes.
they're freaks, you know, they're framed as
Yes.
like, which is kind of ironic.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yes, I mean, I suppose the real challenge to having the corporate family, as you say, where people are not just having strong extended kin networks, but also having economic activity all based within the household and shared within the household, is that makes complete sense if you're artisans, if you are farmers, not so much if you work in corporate finance or whatever, right? There are just the way that the economy has changed over time has meant that there are fewer such roles available. But then also the economy keeps changing, I guess. So it may be in the future that does become more of a model.
Yeah, can you really imagine corporate finance being around like human run, in the face of what's happening with AI? That's the other thing, is there's this huge pressure point. I think we're going to see a complete change in what it means to work and live. And that opens, I mean, it's terrifying, but it opens opportunity.